There was a time when Japan was not a world power, but it had something that others could not stop: a hunger to conquer the world. From small workshops to giants like Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki, the Japanese began to manufacture motorcycles that little by little made Europe and America tremble. Racing, innovation, rivalries, and machines that became legendary. But how did Japan manage to go from copying foreign technology to dominating world motorcycling? Today, we travel to the past to discover how the Japanese two-wheeled empire was born. To understand how Japan ended up dominating the world of motorcycles, we have to go back to 1945. The country had been devastated by the war, with cities destroyed, a weakened economy, and enormous transportation needs. For millions of Japanese people, the automobile was too expensive. An affordable, lightweight, and fuel-efficient motorcycle could become a fundamental tool for rebuilding everyday life. Against that backdrop, Soichiro Honda appeared, an engineer obsessed with engines. In 1946, he founded the Honda Technical Research Institute and began by adapting small auxiliary engines to bicycles. The idea was simple but brilliant: to transform a common bicycle into a cheap and practical motorized vehicle. Those early experiments allowed Honda to understand what the Japanese market really needed: economy, ease of maintenance, and, above all, reliability. Demand grew rapidly, and Honda began developing complete motorcycles. In 1947, the A-Type auxiliary engine appeared, and shortly after, the company took a decisive leap with the Dream D-Type, introduced in 1949. It was no longer just a bicycle with an engine. It was a motorcycle designed by Honda from scratch, proving that this small company had much bigger ambitions. The Dream D-Type was a motorcycle fully developed by the company following its initial experiments with auxiliary bicycle engines. Equipped with a 98 cubic centimeter two-stroke single-cylinder engine, it was designed with the real needs of post-war Japan in mind: low fuel consumption, simple construction, accessible maintenance, and enough durability for everyday use. The Dream D-Type wasn't looking to set speed records or take on the big European motorcycles just yet. Its true mission was much more practical: to become a mobility tool for a population that needed to rebuild. Honda understood that a motorcycle had to start easily, consume little fuel, and be relatively easy to maintain. That philosophy of utility, efficiency, and reliability would end up becoming one of the brand's greatest strengths. But behind that simple motorcycle, there was a much greater ambition. Soichiro Honda didn't want his company to be limited to manufacturing affordable vehicles for the Japanese market. He wanted to prove that Japanese engineers could develop motorcycles capable of competing technologically with the best European machines. The problem was that Honda still didn't have the international prestige necessary to convince anyone, and there was a way to achieve it. While Honda was beginning to build its reputation, another Japanese company was preparing its own revolution. In 1955, Yamaha introduced the YA1, its first production motorcycle. It was a lightweight, single-cylinder, two-stroke, 125cc motorcycle, technically inspired by the German DKW RT125, but adapted and developed with Japanese engineering. Its elegant design and red finish showed that a small motorcycle could also be attractive. The Y1 didn't stand out just for its looks. Yamaha had paid special attention to manufacturing quality, performance, and ease of use. For a company just entering the market, that was fundamental. It needed to prove that it could manufacture a competitive and reliable motorcycle. And the strategy was clear from the beginning: selling cheaply wasn't enough. They had to make Japanese motorcyclists want to own a Yamaha. That's why the YA1 quickly began to compete. In 1955, it participated in important Japanese races and achieved outstanding results, including victories in the Mount Fuji hill climb. Its sporting success helped build a reputation that a conventional advertising campaign would have struggled to achieve. Its characteristic red color ended up accompanying the nickname Red Dragonfly, a name that reflected its small size and agility. Yamaha had just discovered a formula that would define its entire history: compete to develop, win to demonstrate, and then sell. Racing allowed them to find problems, improve engines, and perfect components before bringing them to street motorcycles. The Y1 was just the beginning, because that little machine would prove that Yamaha had much greater ambitions. Japan was no longer just rebuilding its industry, it was preparing the tools to conquer the world. During the 50s, Japanese manufacturers understood that conquering only their domestic market would not be enough. Europe had been building motorcycles with enormous prestige for decades. While brands like Triumph, Norton, BMW, Ducati, and MV Agusta dominated the imagination of enthusiasts, Japan was still seen as a newcomer. That's why Honda, Yamaha, and Suzuki began a silent race. Not just to build more motorcycles, but to prove they could build better ones. In 1958, a machine appeared that would completely change that strategy: the Honda Super Cub. Small, economical, simple, and extraordinarily easy to ride. It was designed to become a motorcycle for everyone. Its four-stroke engine, low fuel consumption, and semi-automatic transmission allowed it to be used with practically no prior experience. Honda had understood something fundamental. To conquer the planet, it wasn't always necessary to build the fastest motorcycle. First, you had to build one that millions of people would want to use. The success of the Super Cub was gigantic and turned Honda into a company with true global ambitions. Its design allowed it to adapt to different markets and usage conditions, while its mass production helped keep prices competitive. The motorcycle ended up spreading across Asia, Europe, America, and numerous developing countries. That changed the international perception of Japan. Their motorcycles were no longer just simple, economical alternatives, but products capable of competing on quality, practicality, and reliability. But Suzuki had other plans. In the mid-60s, they introduced the T20, a 250cc two-stroke twin-cylinder that proved the Japanese industry could also manufacture sports motorcycles. It was lightweight, fast, and technically advanced for its class. Suzuki began to shed its image as an exclusively utilitarian manufacturer and started seeking a place among sports brands. The T20 was important because it demonstrated that Japan could also offer performance, fun, and character, not just economy. Yamaha followed an even more unexpected path with the DT1, introduced in 1968. This 250 cubic centimeter motorcycle combined a two-stroke engine, long travel suspension, dual-purpose tires, and a design ready to leave the asphalt. It could be used for commuting during the week and become a true adventure machine on the weekend. Yamaha had found an audience that wanted a bike capable of doing practically everything. The success of the DT1 was much more important than its own sales. It helped popularize the dual-purpose motorcycle concept worldwide, the direct predecessor to modern trail and adventure bikes. And this is where the real change happens. Japan was no longer copying European trends. It was creating new categories and finding needs that other manufacturers hadn't yet exploited. The strategy was working: compete, experiment, manufacture better, and then bring those ideas to millions of motorcyclists around the planet. Japan had already learned how to manufacture affordable, reliable, and attractive motorcycles, but it still had a problem. Europe had been accumulating prestige in racing for decades. British and Italian brands were synonymous with racing, while Japanese manufacturers were still seen as newcomers. To change that perception, Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki understood that they needed to enter the arena where no advertising campaign could hide weaknesses: racing. The strategy was almost perfect: compete, learn, improve, win, and finally sell. And Honda took this philosophy to one of the most difficult stages on the planet. In 1959, the brand officially participated in the Isle of Man TT, a legendary competition that demanded enormous levels of speed, precision, and endurance. For Honda, that meant much more than just competing in a race. It was entering directly into the territory of European manufacturers with decades of experience. Japan was saying that it didn't want to remain a spectator. It wanted to sit at the same table as the great powers of motorcycling. The results didn't come overnight, but the experience gained was immense. Honda learned how to prepare engines to work for long periods at maximum demand, how to improve stability, and how to manufacture increasingly precise components. Competition also drove an engineering culture based on constant improvement. The Japanese began to understand that victory didn't depend solely on having more power, but on ensuring that every component functioned perfectly throughout an entire race. Over the following years, Japanese participation in international competitions grew rapidly. Honda began to reap success in the Motorcycle World Championship, while Yamaha, Suzuki, and later Kawasaki developed their own sports programs. Racing became a true technological war. Each victory increased the brand's prestige, and every innovation could end up appearing on a production motorcycle. Japan was steadily building something truly remarkable, a foundation that Europe had taken many long decades to achieve, a formidable international reputation built entirely on proven results. And then, everything changed in 1969. It was the pivotal moment when all that hard-earned engineering experience finally transitioned from the intensity of the racetracks and arrived directly at the local dealerships, forever altering the automotive landscape for drivers everywhere. Honda introduced the CB750 Four, a motorcycle that seemed to belong to a completely superior category. Its 750 cubic centimeters four-cylinder engine, electric starter, and front disc brake offered an extraordinary combination for the time. What was truly revolutionary was that Honda could mass-produce that technology and sell it at a much more accessible price than many European bikes with similar performance. The race had just hit the streets. During the 70s, the Japanese industry stopped being a promise and began to become a true global powerhouse. Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki began exporting motorcycles on a large scale, while European and American consumers discovered a combination that was hard to beat: good quality, competitive prices, reliability, and performance. Traditional European brands began to feel a pressure that would forever change the market balance. In 1972, the Kawasaki Z1 appeared, one of the ultimate expressions of that revolution. Its 903cc four-cylinder engine, double overhead camshaft, and enormous performance placed it among the most desired motorcycles on the planet. Honda responded with increasingly sophisticated machines, such as the spectacular six-cylinder CBX1000. Yamaha introduced the XS1100, demonstrating that Japan could also build great touring bikes, while Suzuki was perfecting its sports and two-stroke engines. The transformation was already irreversible. Japanese brands had gone from studying European motorcycles to setting new benchmarks for quality, performance, and technology. The 80s were probably one of the wildest eras of Japanese motorcycling. Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki entered a technological war where each new model tried to be faster, lighter, and more sophisticated than the previous one. Competition had ceased to be just a marketing tool. Now it was the laboratory where the bikes that would end up hitting the streets were developed. In 1984, Kawasaki launched the GPZ 900R Ninja, a motorcycle that would change the brand's image forever. Its 908cc liquid-cooled four-cylinder engine with 4 valves per cylinder allowed it to reach speeds close to 250 kilometers per hour. But its importance went beyond the numbers. It inaugurated the Ninja era and turned that name into a synonym for speed, technology, and aggression. A year later, Suzuki responded with the GSXR 750. directly applying racing philosophy to a production motorcycle. Its four-cylinder engine was accompanied by a lightweight chassis and full fairing, seeking to reduce weight rather than simply increasing power. Suzuki understood a fundamental rule of racing: a lighter bike can brake, turn, and accelerate better. The GSX-R created a new generation of sport bikes. Yamaha didn't take long to respond with the FZR-1000, a superbike that combined a powerful four-cylinder engine with a chassis that was extremely advanced for its time. Technologies like the Delta Box system helped improve the rigidity and precision of the overall package. The FZR brought street bikes even closer to racing machines, demonstrating that a street-legal motorcycle could offer performance capable of leaving many previous sport bikes behind. But Honda decided to change the rules in 1992 with the CBR900RR Fireblade. Instead of continuing to increase displacement and weight, Honda sought a compact, lightweight, and extremely agile motorcycle. The idea was simple. A superbike didn't just need more horsepower, it needed to make better use of it. The Fireblade revolutionized the segment and forced its rivals to completely rethink the relationship between power, weight, size, and handling. By the mid-90s, Japan already dominated superbikes, but a new obsession appeared: top speed. In 1996, Honda introduced the CBR1100XX Super Blackbird, which took the throne of the fastest motorcycle from the Kawasaki ZZR1100, equipped with a 1,137 cubic centimeter four-cylinder engine. It wasn't just a sports bike, it was designed to cover huge distances at extremely high speeds, combining acceleration, stability, and comfort. For a time, it became one of the fastest production motorcycles on the planet. The Super Blackbird represented a new Japanese philosophy: a bike capable of being extremely fast without behaving like an uncomfortable racing machine. Honda worked very carefully on aerodynamics, stability, and engine power delivery to create a motorcycle that could easily maintain high speeds over very long distances. Its name, inspired by the famous SR-71 Blackbird spy plane, made it quite clear what Honda wanted to convey: speed, technology, and the ability to devour miles. But Suzuki wasn't willing to let Honda keep the crown. In 1999, the GSX 1300R Hayabusa appeared, a motorcycle that seemed designed by someone who decided to take the speed war too far. Its 1,298 cubic centimeter engine, its enormous acceleration capacity, and bodywork completely molded by aerodynamics allowed it to exceed 300 kilometers per hour in the first tests. Suddenly, the usual figures for superbikes seemed ridiculous. The Hayabusa was different, even visually. Its design didn't seek to please everyone. Every curve had an aerodynamic function. The low front end, the massive bodywork, and the characteristic rear end were designed to cut through the air at extreme speeds. Suzuki didn't just want to build a fast motorcycle. They wanted to build the fastest production motorcycle in the world. And for a time, they succeeded. The battle for speed had truly reached an entirely new level at this point. While Honda and Suzuki were fighting over kilometers per hour, Yamaha decided to attack on another front. In 1998, the YZF R1 appeared, a 998cc superbike that completely changed the concept of leader-class sport bikes. Its four-cylinder engine, compact dimensions, and low weight offered an extraordinary power-to-weight ratio. Yamaha proved that it wasn't necessary to indefinitely increase engine displacement to achieve brutal performance. The bike had to be made more efficient and lighter. The R1 had a huge impact because it brought a production motorcycle even closer to being a true racing machine. For many motorcyclists, it was no longer necessary to buy a special bike to experience track sensations. A Japanese superbike could come straight out of the dealership, ready to offer impressive performance. Thus, by the end of the 90s, Japan had achieved something extraordinary. It dominated top speed with the Hayabusa and, at the same time, redefined the superbike concept with the R1. The Japanese revolution was practically complete. In just a few decades, Japan went from manufacturing small motorcycles to rebuild a devastated country to becoming one of the greatest powers in world motorcycling. Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki transformed a need for transportation into an industrial revolution. What began with small engines and modest workshops ended up creating machines capable of conquering roads, racetracks, and markets on every continent. But perhaps the most impressive thing wasn't the records or the production figures, it was the change in perception. Japanese motorcycles stopped being seen as economical alternatives to European ones and began to become global benchmarks. That competition forced all manufacturers to improve. Engines evolved, chassis became more precise, and technology advanced. And millions of motorcyclists ended up benefiting from that war, because this story didn't start with a superbike. It started in a destroyed Japan, with small workshops, limited resources, and people who refused to accept that their country had to remain behind Europe. First, they built simple motorcycles. Then, they dared to compete. Then, they started to win. And finally, they reached a point where the big European brands had to look toward Japan to discover what would come next. Honda, Yamaha, Suzuki, and Kawasaki didn't conquer the world overnight. They did it race after race, engine after engine, mistake after mistake, and victory after victory. The Dream, the JA1, the Super Cub, the DT1, the CB750, the Z1, the GSXR, the Fireblade, the R1, and the Hayabusa were much more than just motorcycles. They were chapters of a revolution built by engineers, mechanics, and workers who transformed the history of motorcycling. Japan proved that a motorcycle could be fast without sacrificing reliability, technological without becoming inaccessible, and mass-produced without compromising on quality. Europe had decades of tradition and a glorious history. Japan had hunger, discipline, and an almost unhealthy obsession with improvement. When those two philosophies collided, motorcycling changed forever. And that competition raised the expectations of every motorcyclist on the planet. And perhaps that's why, when we hear a Honda, a Yamaha, a Suzuki, or a Kawasaki start up today, we don't just hear an engine. We hear the story of a country that decided to rise from its ruins and show the world what it was capable of. Because some motorcycles are remembered for their speed, others for their victories. But the Japanese ones are remembered for something much bigger, having turned the reconstruction of a nation into a revolution on two wheels. And as long as one of them keeps roaring on some road in the world, that revolution will never have ended. And behind each one of those motorcycles, there were people. Engineers who spent nights looking for a few more horsepower, mechanics who took engines apart over and over again, riders who risked everything on the circuits, and workers who turned thousands of parts into a finished machine. The Japanese Revolution was not just a story of brands, it was the story of a generation that believed that excellence could be built from scratch. The most exciting thing is that those motorcycles ended up accompanying the lives of millions of people. They were the first vehicle for many young people, a tool for workers, a companion for travelers, and the dream of those who watched them pass by on the road. Some took their owners on their first big trip. Others were present for moments that were never recorded in any championship. But that meant absolutely everything to someone, and that is the true measure of Japan's impact. It wasn't just the production numbers, the speed records, or the accumulated trophies. It was managing to ensure that a Japanese motorcycle could be found in practically every corner of the planet, and that, decades later, someone could still turn a key, hear the engine wake up, and feel exactly the same emotion they felt the day it left the dealership. Perhaps that is why the Japanese industry achieved something that seemed impossible. It didn't need to erase European history to create its own. It took ideas, studied them, perfected them, and then took them to a level that ended up changing the rules of a game. The true revolution wasn't copying a European motorcycle and making it better. It was learning from it and using that knowledge as a starting point to create something completely new. Each decade added a new page. The 50s brought reconstruction and small motorcycles. The 60s brought international expansion and the first major victories. The 70s took Japan into the territorious superbikes. The 80s really transformed their bikes into true iconic symbols of speed, and the 90s ultimately proved that Japanese engineering could build incredible machines capable of easily exceeding 300 kilometers per hour. But behind all that evolution, there was a philosophy that was constantly repeated: improve what was already working. It didn't matter if it was a small city bike or a competition superbike. Japanese engineers sought to reduce weight, increase reliability, improve performance, and ensure that each generation was superior to the previous one. That obsession with perfecting the details ended up becoming one of the industry's greatest weapons. While Europe defended decades of tradition, Japan was building something different, a culture where innovation could never stop. Every victory on a circuit, every new model, and every technological advancement fueled the next. Thus was born a generation of motorcycles that not only competed against their rivals, but also against the limits of engineering. The goal was always the same: to go a little further than yesterday. And perhaps the most beautiful thing about this story is remembering where it all began. A country devastated by war, small engines, adapted bicycles, and manufacturers who still dreamed of being recognized. Decades later, those same ideas had traveled the entire planet. Japan not only managed to rebuild its industry, it managed to get millions of people to associate its motorcycles with freedom, speed, adventure, and confidence. And that story will keep rolling as long as there is someone willing to twist the throttle.